The movie begins by introducing the concept of the doppelganger. It is explained that when someone dies, their doppelganger appears to them, and the doppelganger is depicted here as a supernatural being. We first encounter a young boy named Nick hiding inside a room, escaping from someone. The person Nick was trying to hide from was his own grandma. However, the aggressive manner in which the grandma was rapidly knocking on the door and trying to break it down led to the realization that this was not his real grandmother, but a doppelganger disguised as her. Nick had locked all the doors, but he forgot to secure one lock, which the doppelganger easily opened. The doppelganger began calling Nick in his grandmother's voice, and as soon as Nick approached the door, the doppelganger seized him and took him away. Following this, a book is shown, which was based on the story of the doppelganger. This serves as the introduction to the movie. We then see Nick, now grown up. He has a wife named Charlie and a loving son named Jacob. Nick wakes Jacob up and tells him to bring down the pumpkin he had painted for school. They both go downstairs and Charlie prepares to leave for her job. Nick begins to draw a portrait of Jacob. Nick had received a notice indicating that his grandma's house would be put up for auction in a few months. Meanwhile, Jacob was watching his favorite cartoon on TV. Jacob remembered the painted pumpkin, so he went upstairs alone to retrieve it. Jacob's shoelaces were untied, causing him to fall down the stairs. By the time Nick realized Jacob was no longer watching television, Jacob had already fallen and died. This was a shocking event. A scene is shown sometime later where Nick is extremely saddened by his son Jacob's death, blaming himself for everything. Charlie was also very distressed. A major concern was that Nick was hearing Charlie's voice speaking harsh words to him, even though Charlie had not actually said anything. Nick's mental state was clearly unwell. Nick went to the garage and looked at Jacob's belongings. Initially, no one was standing behind Nick. Then he started experiencing headaches, and the fetch, which is the doppelganger, appeared behind him. The fetch spoke to Nick using Charlie's voice, instructing him to die because Jacob had died due to Nick. Charlie, who was in her room crying and distraught, suddenly looked out and noticed Nick attempting to kill himself. Charlie managed to save him just in time. The doppelganger clearly wanted Nick dead, and it had appeared to Nick even during his childhood. The scene jumps ahead 1 month, introducing Andrew, a capable therapist. Andrew had received Nick's files and was now responsible for handling his case. It is observed that Andrew sleeps while hugging a pillow. The focus shifts back to Nick and Charlie. Charlie had taken Nick to his grandma's house and moved all his things there. However, she herself would not be staying with him because she had work commitments in the city. Given Nick's mental health, she felt she could not manage him along with her job. She informed him that since she couldn't be present, Andrew would visit him daily. This suggests that the arrangement was entirely Charlie's doing. While they were talking, Nick saw his doppelganger standing behind Charlie. Andrew arrived, explained the situation to Nick, and provided him with some medications. Andrew and Charlie started walking away together, talking. Before leaving, Charlie gave Nick her wedding ring. This implied that Charlie's excuse about work was fabricated. She actually no longer wanted to live with Nick, and the ring indicated she was indirectly seeking a divorce. That night, Nick was working on the incomplete sketch of Jacob. He heard some noises coming from outside. When he looked through the window, no one was there. Still, Nick kept hearing his grandma's voice from outside. Nick closed the window, and the doppelganger then came up behind Nick and grabbed him. This turned out to be a nightmare, leaving Nick terrified. The following morning, Andrew came to visit Nick and talked with him. Nick started hearing Andrew's voice saying negative things to him, which caused Nick to become depressed and upset. The voices accused Nick of killing Jacob, calling Nick worthless, saying Nick should have died instead of Jacob, and wishing Jacob should be finished off. In reality, no one was saying these things. They were all coming from the doppelganger spirit. As established earlier, when someone dies, the doppelganger becomes visible to those around them, which was happening to Nick. Andrew then departed. Outside the house, Andrew noticed a rope tied to a tree that looked like a noose. Andrew then met Shelby, Nick's neighbor, who had known Nick since he was a child. Shelby told Andrew that Nick's parents died when he was very young. Nick then lived in this house with his grandma, and a few years later, his grandma also passed away. Shelby couldn't clearly recall what happened next because it had been a long time. She said she would inform Andrew if she remembered anything further. Andrew was trying to understand Nick's complete history to treat him effectively. This sequence helped clarify the initial scene, suggesting the doppelganger might have started appearing after his parents died. Nick was then seen at the supermarket getting groceries. There too, he heard the same voices, making it seem like people nearby were speaking poorly of him. Obviously, this was not actually happening. Nick tried to call his wife Charlie, but she did not answer. Nick then returned home. Back home, Nick started remembering old memories of Jacob. He looked at Jacob's portrait, which had a photograph of Jacob tucked into the corner. As he touched the photo, Jacob's face disappeared from the picture. Nick heard Jacob's voice coming from upstairs. When he looked up, he heard his grandma's voice coming from downstairs. Looking down, he saw his grandma standing there, who was actually the doppelganger. Then, Nick's own doppelganger appeared, accompanied by Jacob, whose face had been erased. The doppelganger threw Jacob down the stairs. While attempting to save Jacob, Nick also fell down the stairs. He then had a dream where Jacob's face was completely missing. This meant Nick could no longer recall Jacob's face, indicating his memories were becoming hazy. When he regained consciousness, he was even more disturbed and immediately went to paint. His mental state was severely deteriorating, and he went to paint in an effort to remember his son's face. Meanwhile, Charlie was also very sad about Jacob and worried about Nick. The following morning, Andrew came to see Nick. Outside, Andrew met Shelby again. Shelby informed Andrew that on the night Nick's grandma died, Nick ran to her house and kept repeating only one phrase: the fetch. Nick looked like he was fleeing from someone. This confirms the opening scene, where Nick was running from a doppelganger. Inside the house, Nick continued to experience visions of his doppelganger and saw strange phenomena. Nick and Andrew began moving items into the attic. Nick asked Andrew to go downstairs to fetch some books. Nick then saw his doppelganger again, hiding under a sofa, hurling abuses at him. Just then, Andrew returned upstairs with the books. Among them was the book shown at the beginning of the movie, The Doctor's Fetch. Seeing the book distressed Nick significantly, which Andrew noticed. There are two possibilities. Either Nick had experienced tragic events since childhood, the loss of his parents, then his grandmother, and now his son, and perhaps he read this book, leading him to develop this doppelganger concept in his imagination, possibly starting after his parents died. Alternatively, a real demonic entity was present. They went downstairs. Andrew also heard some noises coming from under the sofa, but when he checked, nothing was there. Before leaving, Andrew suggested Nick sit outside with him for a while, and they did so. Nick shared everything about his childhood with Andrew, including the deaths of his parents and grandma. He also told Andrew that he did not recall trying to kill himself and had no intention of doing so, as he needed to look after Charlie. He revealed that he cleaned Jacob's blood himself because he felt everything was his fault, and he was hearing strange voices, though he didn't give many details about the voices. Andrew then left to get some food for Nick. After Andrew left, Nick relentlessly tried to remember his son Jacob's face, but he still failed to recall it. He searched the entire house for Jacob's pictures. All the pictures he found were blurred. Nick then heard the sound of Jacob's favorite cartoons coming from the TV. He went outside and saw Jacob sitting there, but before Nick could see Jacob's face, his doppelganger crashed through the window and entered. It seemed the doppelganger actively prevented him from remembering anything. Nick was terrified. Outside, Shelby and her grandson were cleaning the garden. They saw Nick standing in the window, completely unresponsive. Meanwhile, Andrew met Charlie and informed her of Nick's situation. Andrew detailed many aspects of Nick's childhood that Charlie likely did not know. He explained that on the night Nick's grandma died from a heart attack, she was reading The Doctor's Fetch to him. Andrew suggested Nick made the fetch, the doppelganger, a reality. Now this fetch, being Nick's imagination, was controlling him, and they needed to help Nick gain self-control, otherwise he would be destroyed. Andrew noted that while the fetch wasn't real, it was absolutely real to Nick. This still raised the question of what caused Andrew to hear noises under the sofa if the fetch was merely imaginary. Nick was terribly upset because he couldn't remember Jacob's face, and the doppelganger continued to torment him with harsh words. Distressed, Nick repeatedly hit his forehead against the table. When the voices stopped and he calmed down, Nick washed his face and covered the broken window. He called Charlie, and they spoke for a while. Andrew then visited Nick, and they talked. Andrew gave Nick new medications. Nick took all the medications, but skipped the sleeping pills because they gave him bad nightmares, a fact he withheld from Andrew, though he should have disclosed it. Andrew then shared that his own daughter had taken her life 2 years prior, so he understood how Nick felt. Andrew believed this personal experience might be why he sensed something. Andrew affirmed that he knew what it was like to lose a loved one. Andrew then applied hypnosis therapy to Nick. Nick regressed to the night his grandma died. He saw his grandma, who was, in fact, the doppelganger. Nick walked through the house and encountered his own doppelganger. The doppelganger incited Nick to take his own life. To further torment Nick, it began speaking in Jacob's voice, encouraging him to kill himself. Andrew pulled Nick out of the hypnosis. Nick was fixated on the fact that he could not remember Jacob's face. Andrew moved him to his bed and then informed Charlie about what happened. Andrew then went to sleep himself. The next morning, Andrew departed. Charlie arrived. She noticed Jacob's incomplete portrait and another covered portrait nearby. Before she could uncover it, Nick entered the room. They went outside. Charlie observed bruises on Nick's neck, which were caused by the doppelganger. Nick claimed they were likely side effects of the medication. As they talked, their relationship began to mend gradually. However, Nick saw his doppelganger in the distant fields. He told Charlie he was going to take a shower, and then they would go out for dinner. Inside the bathroom, Nick continued to see strange things and hear the doppelganger's voices continuously. Meanwhile, outside, Shelby arrived with her grandson. She had come to speak with Charlie about the evening when Nick was standing unresponsive in the window. Seeing Charlie and Shelby talking, Nick quickly put on his shirt. His entire body was covered in bruises. In his rush, he dropped Charlie's wedding ring. When Nick went outside, he mistook Shelby's grandson for Jacob and started picking him up to take him inside the house. Charlie slapped him, snapping him back to reality. Shelby, frightened, immediately left with her grandson. Charlie started demanding why Nick was behaving this way. The doppelganger came and sat next to Nick, trying to take control. Nick, influenced by the doppelganger, told Charlie to leave. Charlie left in anger. When Nick came to his senses, he felt that Charlie had abandoned him. The doppelganger continued to whisper horrible things, further deteriorating his mental state. The doppelganger had now seized complete control over Nick. 2 hands of the doppelganger were seen emerging from Nick's back. Charlie called Andrew and told him everything. Andrew and Charlie returned to Nick's house. The entire house had been painted black. They looked at the covered portraits, which had been painted by Nick's doppelganger. They found Nick, but he was accompanied by his doppelganger. Seeing the doppelganger convinced Andrew that Nick had been telling the truth. The doppelganger attacked Charlie and Andrew. When it attempted to kill Charlie, Nick surrendered and gave complete control of his body to the doppelganger. The doppelganger now fully controlled Nick's physical body. The last resort to save Nick was to help him regain control of his body. Therefore, when Nick placed the noose around his neck, Andrew initiated hypnosis once more. Nick was transported back into his own mind, trapped within himself, orchestrated by the evil doppelganger spirit. In this mental realm, the doppelganger attempted to stop Nick from regaining control of his body and urged him to end his life. Consequently, in reality, Nick was slowly slipping off the chair, actively killing himself. Andrew suddenly recalled that Nick was deeply distressed because he could not remember Jacob's face. Andrew instructed Charlie to bring a picture of Jacob. Seeing Jacob's picture helped Nick remember his son's face. Still, the doppelganger resisted letting Nick take back his body. Andrew's encouraging words helped Nick finally regain control. Nick managed to place the noose around the doppelganger's neck instead and destroyed it. Nick successfully regained control of his body, and the doppelganger was finished. The story progresses several weeks forward. Nick and Andrew are seen together, and Nick is completely well. Nick asks Andrew why he sleeps hugging the pillow. Andrew explains that his daughter gave it to him and he cannot sleep without it. Afterward, Nick and Charlie are shown having moved into Nick's grandma's house. Nick had completed Jacob's portrait. He finally remembered everything, and they were both happy. However, the events do not end completely cleanly. In a glass reflection, a faint image of Nick's doppelganger is briefly visible. This indicates that while the immediate threat was gone, the small space of grief that remains in the heart after losing a loved one will always persist. This symbolizes the sorrow over losing his parents, his grandma, and his son Jacob, which will permanently remain with them. With this, the film concludes.